Hello, welcome to another edition of the Willie Bragg Show, where I love to discuss politics. And today we are going to discuss ANTIFA, because apparently being against fascism is controversial in America these days. Can you imagine being against fascism is controversy? I mean, apparently it is. And there are, in the last few years with this whole Antifa thing that's been going on, there's been people calling for Antifa to be designated as a domestic terrorist organization. I'm not kidding you. I mean, there are people that think that it sounds very sensible to declare Antifa a domestic terrorist group. I mean, they think it's more than reasonable to do that, but all the other groups, if you dare do anything to a right-wing group, you're infringing on their free speech. And you hear me yap all the time. What a whore for the First Amendment and free speech I am, and it includes people that I despise the most, which is a lot of on the hard right. Now, if there are people who wants to declare Antifa a terrorist organization, here's my question. Does that, I mean, declaring Antifa a terrorist organization, would that imply banning Antifa? I want to know. I mean, to what extent would this declaration of Antifa as a terrorist group, where would it go? I mean, will you just have them monitored, being kept an eye on? How do you go about that? Because here's the thing. Antifa is not an organization. It's a movement. It's a natural embryonic movement of like-minded people that, well, like-minded in the sense that they're united by one thing, anti-fascism. They differ in various ideologies. They are not a monolith. They do not all think alike. But let's go with symbolism, because that's very important, because there's a lot of misnomers and a lot of historical revisionism that is very elementary, that needs re-explaining, because if it doesn't get explained adequately, then people are going to go and take the narrative and interpret the narrative the way that historical revisionists are trying to have it, put forth, because there's a smear job or an attempt to demonize the left at every opportunity. I know there are going to be some conservatives that, well, isn't that what the left do? They demonize the right at every opportunity. Okay. I have said this over and over again, and I need to have this clarified. When I go after the right, I am not talking about people who are merely conservative on taxes, on deregulation, maybe do not like unions or think less of unions, or opposes universal health care, or maybe do not like the idea of abortion. I mean, if they are opposed to abortion, or if they're socially conservative, I mean, or a little old-fashioned on certain morals, or what they view as tradition. I am not talking about that. I am talking about, when I talk about the right, and let's go and make a distinction between what I call the center right, which I would designate as the normal right, the right that wants to work within the system, that wants to put forth policies that I disagree with, but those are policies that you can actually have a debate about, and everything within the context of civil society. I am not talking about that. I am talking about people who are interested in violence to achieve their ends. Now I'm going to hear, well, what about Antifa? And what about these revolutionary groups? Okay, the left in the United States, even so-called violent leftist organizations and movements, are very minimal compared to the right. The Department of Homeland Security has declared domestic right-wing terrorism as a big threat, and what they mean mostly white nationalist groups as a general rule. Not the normal right, not mainstream conservatism, but the hardcore white nationalist right. They view terrorism from abroad as also a problem, but as far as so-called left-wing terrorism, very minute. The left is very weak in this country. Just in case nobody notices it, the left is very, very docile and very weak. And I'm sorry, Democrats do not constitute as the left. Now, this photo here, this is a photo of the Young People's Socialist League from the early days of the Socialist Party of America. Their symbol was the three arrows, and hold on a second here, and that's why they were like the first organization in America to adopt that symbol. But it's really an older symbol, because you're going to have to go back. You're going to have to go back a little bit further than that, and that was like in the 1930s. The Social Democrats in 1932, Social Democratic Party put out a campaign poster against Hitler. I mean, it was also against the monarchy. It was also against communism. It was also against, it was basically against powerful institutions and what they call the authoritarian right and the authoritarian left at that time, because everybody was kind of obviously of each other in Germany. And the Social Democrats at that time were considered the centrist party of the center left, whereas the Christian Democratic Party was the centrist party on the center right. And so this was the famous campaign poster from 1932. You notice the three arrows right here. The three arrows right here. That's where it came from. So when you see the Antifa symbol, it derived from the 1932 SPD campaign poster that was around in the 1932 election in Germany that unfortunately had a sad outcome. So I get tired of hearing revisionist historians with their dumb anecdotes about, well, how Hitler was on the left and how Hitler was a socialist and I mean, it's just so dumb. I feel like I have IQ point. It just makes me mad. When people listen to Ben Shapiro or people listen to Steven Crowder or Dinesh D'Souza spew out that garbage and they believe it. They believe it. And I tell people, if Steven Crowder and Ben Shapiro and Dinesh D'Souza especially is spewing out garbage, it's all the more reason to just reject it. Let me put it this way. If Dinesh Shapiro and Steven Crowder said that the Beatles was a popular group from Great Britain that broke it big around the world in 1964, and they were like the most popular group of the 1960s, because those three assholes said it, I would have to go and do research to make damn sure it's accurate. That's how much I would doubt Steven Crowder, Ben Shapiro, and Dinesh D'Souza. That's how fraudulent those guys are. You must know. But getting back to America, I'm very proud history of the Young People's Socialist League with the three arrow symbols. One famous person, he turned out radical, but started off as relatively, more on the peaceful side of the civil rights movement, was Stokely Carmichael from the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, who was in YPSL, Young People's Socialist League. And then he became involved with the Black Power movement, as we all known it to be today. So, but he was a very early supporter of YPSL. He was actually a member of the Young People's Socialist League. A very famous incident happened in 1964, and a movie called Mississippi Burning was based off of it. 3 civil rights workers were murdered by the Klan, and we're talking about Andrew Goodman, Michael Schwerner, and James Chaney. James Chaney, the African American in the middle, was not a member of YPSL, but Andrew Goodman and Michael Schwerner was. They were members of the Young People's Socialist League. So we have civil rights heroes in the movement. Unfortunately, the Klan killed these three men. And even though it's just sad how the people that were involved with the murder kind of got off very lightly when you think about it. I mean, some of them were prosecuted, but a lot of their sentences were too light. It was horrible, just what happened. One person that I'm actually proud of in regard to the history in Yipsel, and I'm going to get back to Antifa in a minute because it's a shared symbol. That's basically why I'm talking about it. Is that and we known him very well. He was here he was in 1963 getting arrested at a civil rights protesting segregation in Chicago, and that's a very young Bernie Sanders doing so. So while Hillary Clinton was sitting there calling Bernie Sanders racially insensitive and all this sort of thing in 2016, Bernie Sanders was sitting there fighting the good fight for civil rights and racial equality in 1963 and 64 and throughout the 60s, while Hillary Clinton was a Barry Goldwater gal. So what does that tell you when it comes to Hillary Clinton once again? So, but anyway, Bernie Sanders was also a member of the Young People's Socialist League. So I had that to be very, very, very proud of. But I want to go back to this whole thing with regard to Antifa. Antifa is not an ideological monolith. There are people in Antifa. If people say, "Well, Antifa is filled with a bunch of radical, violent, define violent, communists or what have you." Are there communists in Antifa? Sure. There's people who are communists, but you know what? There are different branches of communism that exist in the world. Communism is also not a monolith. I mean, you got your Stalinists, you'll have your Maoists, you'll have your Trotskyists, you'll have people who follow Tito. I'm not any kind of a communist, but if I were to go into a Marxist-Leninist route, I would probably veer more toward Titoism, which Tito was the premier of Yugoslavia until his death in 1980. Field Marshal Joseph Broz Tito. I suggest you look him up. He is one of my favorites, even though I don't classify myself as a communist in any way, shape, or form. But what I'm saying is that there are people who we classified as communists within Antifa. Sure, of course, yeah. But there's also a lot of people in Antifa that would be classified as socialists or social democrats or democratic socialists. So I mean, it's not a monolith, and democratic socialism or social democracy or plain out socialism, for those that are democratic socialists or social democrats, they would tell you that their way is more socialist than what they would view communism to be, and communists will say, no, our way is the true path toward socialism. So there's been that big rift, especially since the Russian Revolution, and so you have today what still stands is the largest organization in the world, which is the Socialist International, which is the worldwide federation of democratic socialists, social democratic, labor, and other center-left parties around the world. An ideology I myself align myself with mostly. This is my ideological classification right here. This is, if anybody must know where I stand ideologically as far as flavors of socialism, I stand here. I would be in the various social democratic labor parties around the world, if you will, the political parties with a rose. So, but the point I'm trying to make is that this Antifa movement is not a monolith. I mean, there are people who are absolutely committed to fighting fascism 100,000% by any means necessary. Meaning that if the fascists come around, what they're going to do, they're going to be right there to put a stop to it right there by any force and by any means necessary. And honestly, you need those people there to do that, because there are some violent people on the right, on the loose right now. You need some people to protect you. There are people in Antifa who are 100% totally committed to nonviolence and to pacifism. You also need that because pacifism is also key to our fighting for justice and racial equality and all of that. Following the path of Gandhi, following the path of Martin Luther King. I mean, following, if you will, following the path of Jesus. But the thing about it is that the path of nonviolence has also been a very successful model too to follow. So, and then you have people who are kind of have a sort of versatile approach that, only violence, only when it's necessary, self-defense. And what do you define as who will you define as Antifa? Simply anybody who is opposed to fascism, meaning anybody who's opposed to racism, anybody who's opposed to anti-Semitism, anybody who's opposed to homophobia, anybody who's opposed to any sort of prejudice that exists whatsoever. If you're opposed to basically treating people in an unequal way because of who they are, then you're anti-fascist. I will argue, yes, hear me out. I will argue that if you're a Republican and you happen to not be racist, and you're against anti-Semitism, and you're against homophobia, and you're against any other prejudice out there, you too, sir or ma'am, can be an anti-fascist. And that's my point right there. It doesn't take being a left-wing ideologue to do this. It just takes being a good person. You don't have to be left. You don't have to be right. You just have to be a good person to be opposed to racism. I mean, obviously, if I'm going to be partisan for a second, Marjorie Taylor Greene would never qualify to be a member of Antifa. She just wouldn't. Even though I do think that Sean Hannity's a piece of shit on his show. I mean, if he is against prejudice, he would qualify more. I mean, not that I think he would want to join, but I'm just trying to make a point here. That's all I'm trying to do. But this whole idea of demonizing Antifa is absolutely silly. It really is. And I heard one person say that if a quote Nazi does not want to have the shit have the shit knocked out of them, it's very simple. Don't be a fucking Nazi. And how do I interpret that? Don't try recreating what Hitler did. Meaning in my interpretation of it, the way I'm going to interpret it is, if you think like a Nazi and want to praise Hitler and all of that, I'm not the kind of person that wants to police your thoughts and tell you who you should love, who you should hate, who you should admire, and who you shouldn't, because I don't believe in policing people's thoughts. But what such a person should never have a right to do is to inflict harm on another human being. You want to sit there like a dumbass and dress up in some brown shirt and sport the swastika around and go see Kyle and all that bullshit? If that's what makes you feel good to do that, that's your right to do that. I mean, even if you get the proper permits to go out protesting in the streets, if you're not harming anybody, I'm a free speech person. You got a right to do that. What you don't have a right to have is the right to inflict harm. And that's where you should be stopped if you're such a person. If you're such a person and your intention is to harm, you're actually trying to harm somebody because of who they are or what they believe, and you're going to go and try to harm them in the name of that ideology, yeah, you should be stopped. Absolutely. Well, for example, I know that the Southern Poverty Law Center have an amazing tactic of whenever violence takes place, right-wing violence takes place, to do a civil case against such organizations. Well, they have a free speech right to hate who they want to hate, and nobody will fuck with them if they don't fuck with anybody else. But when they go and try to harm people, and then they're slapped with a civil suit, and if they have like their property's worth like $1 million or something, yeah. If the judge says the $1 million should be awarded to the victims of the families of the victims, and if it means shutting that business down, that organization down, well, here's what I got to tell that organization: you shouldn't go around killing people. I mean, it didn't have to come to that, right? Absolutely. So, I mean, I think it's a brilliant strategy groups like Southern Poverty Law Center have in that particular regard. So, but as far as Antifa is concerned, if there's any legislation that ever gets passed that becomes a law that Antifa is a designated terrorist organization, do you know what I'm planning to do on my YouTube channel? I am going to get a big old fat banner of Antifa, and I'm going to stick it behind me, because I will defy such a law, because I am anti-fascist. You don't have to be a member. You just have to be against fascism. And let me tell you, I oppose fascism. I mean, any decent human being, a moderately decent human being, not sanctimonious, overly sanctimonious, just you're not like overly good and all that. Just a human being in any society in the world would look at things like fascism and view it as something negative and horrible and shitty. So, I mean, you have the president of the United States 2 years ago in the event of George Floyd's death. I mean, more concerned about what Antifa is doing than the police violence against minorities. And I'm not saying that every police officer is doing this sort of thing. I mean, I don't even go as far as some radical left activists in that regard. I don't sit there and view every police officer as some fucking asshole out there trying to do this sort of thing. But I do think there's enough bad apples that law enforcement and criminal justice need some serious reforms. It really needs serious reforms. It needs some serious overhauling and all of this sort of thing. And we need to have a real conversation about this. And I don't understand why that is such an extreme. They're more concerned about the response to George Floyd's death than the fact that asshole cop, what he did to an unarmed black man in Minnesota. And this pattern that repeats all around the country all the time, even with fucking body cams on these cops, they still just in your face do this sort of thing all the time. And I just don't understand why there's a power trip with some of these folks in law enforcement that do this. But that's not as big a problem as Antifa. And they think that Antifa is a bigger problem than the knuckleheads with the tiki torches in Charlottesville, or the crazy Klan Nazi people that shot down the union organizers in Greensboro in 1979, the Greensboro massacre. And remember, they got away with that. Those assholes literally got away with that in 1979. Never forget that. So anyway, I'm just kind of pondering these thoughts at 5 o'clock in the morning Eastern Standard Time right now. And anyway, if you like what you heard, press like and comment. If you disagree with what I have to say, comment anyway. We will have a conversation. Feel free to share the comment. I mean, feel free to share the content on this channel. As a First Amendment absolutist, it's my duty to inform you to create your own platform and utilize it, because we're the muckrakers of our time. Also, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, and remember, until next time, We have class war to wage. We got to fight crony capitalism because this is keeping us all down. And there's no need to fight wars abroad. That's obsolete. And war's a racket to only serve the military-industrial complex and defense contractors. That's all it is all about. And we must fight against racism and fight against all the other forms of bigotry out there for equality for all people. And we must fight for preserve our freedom of speech, because when we defend all speech, we're also defending our own damn free speech. And that means we need to also defend fervently the freedom of the press, because as long as people like Julian Assange is held captive, none of us are free. And when Julian Assange isn't free, we're all Julian Assange. And until next time, I am Willie Bragg. I will conclude by saying to you all, music. Take care. Bye-bye.